Welcome, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Auditioning and Casting After COVID. My name is Chevonne Hughes, and I'm an LA-based actor. I am most known for my work on the TV show Greenleaf, and I'm also a graduate of BU's College of Fine Arts. Today's webinar is sponsored by the Boston University Alumni Association and is offered to our over 347,000 alumni across the globe. Before we begin, I'd like to welcome the over 125 alumni joining us for this webinar, including members of the BU community, joining us from all over the world, including places like Los Angeles, New York City, Honolulu, Houston, Belgium, Canada, South Korea, and many, many more. We are so glad to have you all with us today. To go over a few housekeeping notes before we begin, today's webinar is scheduled to last about 1 hour. If you have any questions during the webinar, you can submit them throughout the discussion by typing them into the Q&A box. To find the Q&A box, move your mouse over your Zoom screen to reveal the toolbar at the bottom. Then select Q&A. We will do our best to get as many questions as we can. It's now my pleasure to introduce our panelists. Please welcome casting directors and BU alumni, Tara Rubin, Susanne Scheel, and Rachel Reiss. Hi, guys. Hi, Tara, Susanne, and Rachel. It's great to have you here. Welcome. Before we jump in, we wanted to extend a congratulations to Tara for being this year's recipient, along with Robbie Reed of the Hoyt Bowers Award for Career Achievement from the Casting Society of America's Artios Awards, which will take place Thursday. So congratulations, Tara.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much.
You're so welcome. Okay, so let's get started. Let's start with how you all got into casting. Do you think that BU helped you get there? Whoever wants to start. Tara, let's start with you, the award winner. Let's go.
Thank you.
No problem.
Well, I studied theater at the School of Fine Arts for 2 years, and then I transferred to the Liberal Arts College and took my degree in English literature. So in a way, BU uniquely trained me for this career because I have a background in literature, and so close reading of a text and dramatic literature are areas that I studied in college. And I also have enough of a background in theater training that I feel like I can speak to actors and directors, more importantly, probably, and kind of, share a vocabulary and share the kind of milieu with them. So because of my, hybrid experience at BU, I feel like I was very well prepared for this world.
Cool. Anybody else? Susanne or Rachel?
Sure. So BU's completely to blame for me being casting in the best way possible. I started out in the film school, and at the time you had to pick between production, writing, and directing, and I wasn't perfectly fit for any of them. And one of my very wise advisors just said, write down what you love about filmmaking and storytelling and just tell us what that is. And he looked at it for about 2 seconds and said, well, that's casting. And I didn't know what it was. And he explained it to me and he said, well, and my response was, I can get paid to do that? Like, that's a job? And he was like, yeah, it's a very important creative department head. And I think you're quite well suited for it. And I had a bit of the hybrid going on too with dance and theater. Knew I no longer wanted to perform, but very much, wanted to be a part of the creative process. And he just very astutely led me there. And then I just kind of created my own path through COM and CFA to meet, kind of what I needed to train myself on before launching into it. And then my first internship was through the BU and LA program at a casting office. And that led to my first job. So it's all BU's fault.
Mine is also BU's fault, but a little indirectly. So I actually transferred into BU, and before I got there, I had interned at a casting office, so knew I loved it, but I was still you know, exploring different careers and everything. So I was a PR major at BU, but I also did the BULA program. I was a development intern, and because I had casting experience and loved it, I ended up hanging out in the casting office of one of the networks I was interning for. And then once I graduated, just applying to jobs, I reached out to that casting director and was like, hey, anyone you think I should connect with? I'm doing the whole graduating thing. And she's like, you actually just applied to a job with my best friend. So I got that job.
Awesome. I also did the BU in LA program, funny enough. So I guess it's a fruitful program to do if you're going to move out to LA or want to get into other jobs in the industry. Okay, speaking of the industry, let's take us back to March 2020. Dum dum dum. When everything stopped dead in its tracks. How did your jobs change when the shutdown started? This is open to anyone who wants to answer.
I mean, it just, everything came to a halt. You know, I think my last Broadway show that I saw was that Wednesday. So I think it was Wednesday, March 11th. And there was very much a feeling of like, oh my goodness, we shouldn't be here. But I also had this inkling, like, it's going to be a while before I can sit in a Broadway house. So I went, which was probably really reckless, but you know, we didn't have the information we have now then. Like it didn't, you know, they were allowing it. So it didn't feel as bad. But yeah, I mean, Broadway and the film industry shut down pretty much simultaneously. Um, I was able to keep working on some of the audio projects we were doing. We were literally sending like 19 boxes worth of audio kits to actors like all over the country to like keep those going. I work with Audible and Marvel on a couple of different scripted audio projects. So that kept going for a little bit. But then that even kind of took a dive. And then it really took till like the end of October, November for film and TV to kind of start revving back up in New York. I think it came back a bit earlier, like July-ish in LA. But, you know, it was all had to wait for the unions and all the agreements and everything to happen. So it was safe for everyone to go back. And now things are busy now on the film and TV side. And I can let the other two speak to their specific corners of it.
Yeah, similarly to Susanne, right when everything hit, I was in the middle of casting an animated series. So that just kept blowing right through and a bunch more came up. So I'm super grateful and super fortunate that I've been very busy throughout and didn't have much of a pause. But because of that, that meant I was still working and had to make all of these adjustments and figure it out in real time. So there was no kind of pause to be like, all right, let's see what works best. I just had to kind of do it. And also I'm on the tech committee for the Casting Society of America. So as I was trying to figure everything out, I was also trying to help my fellow casting directors and say, try this, what about this? And like figure out what was going on tech-wise. So it's been a wild ride, but I'm very grateful to that the voiceover projects I've been working on have really sped up. And now everything else is kind of picking up as well.
Very cool.
I should say that to everyone who's watching that all the casting directors are really indebted to Rachel for her guidance. From the very beginning, she was able to share information as she was figuring it out on her own. And Susanne led a lot of the more humanitarian efforts that we did as a casting society. So they're pretty great members of our professional organization. Since I work almost exclusively in the theater, our world really closed down on March 12th. I always say that I'm really glad that we didn't know how long it was going to be, because I'm not sure I would have been able to like walk out the door that day if I knew that I was, you know, saying goodbye to people for a whole year. But some of our developmental projects we continued to work on some things that were in development. And I guess the cool thing is the way in which everyone responded so quickly to staying connected to the work, staying connected as a CSA team, and in many other ways too. And you know, we had a workshop that was supposed to go into rehearsal in June, and we did it on Zoom, and we developed a musical. We sent kits to people's homes, and we did it. So, you know, I guess the creative process really, it needs more than a pandemic to completely end it. But the impact on the lives of people who work in the theater has just been, you know, devastating. It's an entire industry, and, you know, across the country. So we are beginning to get our sights on coming back, hopefully in the fall. So we're holding a good thought for that.
Good. I'm glad you guys were all able to come together as a creative team, all different facets of the entertainment industry coming together to kind of be a guiding light for us all to get through this. And we're getting there, and I'm very excited about that. Speaking of that, when do you guys think live auditions or in-person auditions will come back?
I think that's a topic for debate, and I think it depends on the medium. I think some productions are hoping sooner rather than later, but while virtual casting has a lot of pros, there are also a lot of cons. So I think there are some people who want it to stay this way as long as it has to. That being said, I think you can never replace the energy in the room. So we all hope it comes back sooner rather than later, but there are benefits to self-tapes. Like, we can now see so many more people. They don't have to be in our immediate city. So that's a vague answer because I don't think anyone knows the answer. I think there are some that have already come back, which a lot of people would not be on board with. But yeah.
Cool. If anyone wants to chime in, you can. You don't have to, though. This new world has made it a little challenging for both the casting directors and the actors and everyone involved in that process. What philosophies would you like us to use to approach auditioning?
Kara, go ahead.
Oh, you guys have, I think, a little. You've been well. I would like to hear what you say.
Okay, sure.
First.
No, and I think, you know, I was very resistant to the Zoom, like the live Zoom auditions at first, because I don't know, there was something I couldn't quite wrap my head around, and there was an odd comfort of just watching self tapes, like, right, like you submit your tape and I watch it and I send you notes, and like that was a familiar format. But then I was kind of forced into a Zoom thing, and I was like, oh wait, this can actually really work. And I think the lovely thing is the work stays the same, and even though some, you know, for the most part, people, if the internet connection's okay and the timing's okay, you can still actually quite have a meaningful connection between actors and connection between casting directors and your creative team. And it does feel like you're doing it as a team, and you do get a sense of that energy and that loveliness that we all, you know, do this for. It's not the same as being in the room, and I will never sell it as such, but it gets the job done and it accomplishes what it needs to accomplish. And we haven't had like these big snafus of, like, you know, we cast someone via Zoom and then they show up on set and it's somehow like a mismatch or wasn't quite right. Like, that hasn't happened yet. They've been incredibly happy with the people we've found this way. And like Rachel said, it's really opened it up to just getting to see more actors because they're all over the place, and you don't have to be there between, you know, 5 and 7 on a Tuesday to get your shot at it. So that's been really nice, of feeling like you can open up the opportunity for a lot of actors.
Yeah, and I think, as Susanne mentioned, we all acknowledge that we are all wearing new hats. So we are so grateful that actors have taken on so much more responsibility and are now feeling like they need to be lighting people and DPs and audio people and all of these things. And I think in a way that brings us a little bit closer together, because we as well, we now have to be Zoom experts and all of this stuff. And so I think it's a good philosophy to go into a Zoom audition or self-tape audition is the same as it would be in person, which is you are being invited to audition and we are rooting for you, even more so now because we acknowledge that there's a lot more on your shoulders. So it's the people who realize that we want you to knock it out of the park. Like, we want you to be the talent that blows everyone away. So coming in with that confidence and that energy, that's where a lot of the success will come from. The audition should be fun. You love to act. Here's an opportunity to act with someone who's genuinely rooting for you.
Yeah, I completely agree. Especially, you know, the thing that has kind of kept me going was the idea that that actors could do that incredible thing that they do, even under these circumstances, even on Zoom, even in self-tape, you know, and I think we've all seen a lot of those photos of, like, you know, what we see on Zoom and then everything else, you know, in the apartment and people with children in the next room, and you know, they've had to kind of convert their homes and learn a lot about the technical side of it, but the successful, as Rachel and Susanne have said, that when you keep the story forward, when you keep what I think Sandy Meisner said, like, you know, was show off your talent and seize the opportunity to act, right? Like, you just want to, like, make sure that we see, you know, what you have to share with us. And thankfully, we've been able to adapt to this new way of doing it.
Great, thank you. Yeah, everyone's had to put on multiple hats as of late, and which to some feels like a little bit of a drawback. Some feel like, oh, great, I have more control as to how I'm viewed, and I have more chances to get the right take to send off that represents me. What do you feel has been the biggest drawback or hardest adjustment to virtual auditions, whether they be self-tapes or virtual auditions?
I found just, I mean, with Zoom, it helps a bit, but just not getting to work with the actor in person, because there's just something about the chemistry of being in the room in person. And especially if the timeline or the mandate is truly just self tapes, like, you either can be tricked one way or the other way by a self tape, because you're not getting the whole picture of the actor by just seeing a couple of takes. So when there is time, we do the Zoom, and so we can actually, you know, chat a bit, get to know them, work with them, coach them, you know, what we would do in the room. And then most directors have been pretty good about realizing, like, this is just something they have to do, and this is the new format, and if they want to make a movie, they've kind of got to play ball. And I've been really impressed with their willingness to jump in and do it. And but no, it's that just intangible thing in the room, the chemistry, that I think still we can't do over a screen.
And I think also because we know how much work, at least for me, I know I'm empathetic to all the time and the effort that the actor's putting in. So if I'm under a tight deadline and there's one thing I want tweaked in that scene that I got on a self-tape, there's a lot more going into my head of should I call that actor? I only have this much time, and kind of, you know, navigating the stress that I know is not only on the production side, but on the actor side, I think I've also struggled with sometimes.
Also, okay, so on the opposite side of that spectrum, what has been the biggest benefit of virtual casting? And I just had a question come in that kind of is in relation to that. With so much casting happening remotely now, are you more open to casting non-name actors who don't live where you're based or where the project is, or is it important to live in one of the entertainment hubs to be considered? So are you guys able, since it's all virtual, are you able to cast a wider net as opposed to just focusing on one region?
Yes and no, because the traveling's been really tricky, and it's opening up really nicely now. But at the beginning, it was like if you were traveling into New York, it was an automatic 14-day quarantine, and there was no getting around it for a period of time. So then the mandate was only New Yorkers, only people like within the city, even not even outside of the city. And then as the restrictions started to lift and calm, and testing out and all of that became an option, more and more we're able to look outside of the city. But as much as it didn't mandate that you had to be someplace to audition at a specific time, then you still have to say, but yeah, are you going to be in New York 14 days before we need you? Because that's, if you're calling saying I can work on a New York production, that became the mandate. And needing to travel people in became really tricky. And, gosh forbid they tested positive at some point, then it got really, really tricky. So, on the audio projects, oh my God, anywhere, because they could be literally anywhere, because they didn't have to go into the studio in Bryant Park. They could go, that was like absolutely anyone, anywhere. And I don't even remember, I counted on one project how many different states we had. But the film and TV has been really tricky, because it's, you're in close contact with a lot of people on set, and that's been really tricky. But it's much, much better now, because the cases are as good as they are, and it's, so many people are vaccinated. And so it's opening that up quite a bit again. But for a while it was tricky.
And are you more open to actors who aren't exactly names? Are you open to seeing actors that you haven't met yet because it's now all virtual and you have a little bit more flexibility with that?
We always try to open it up, but yes, absolutely, because again, they really don't have to do it in the room with people at a certain time. But yeah, there's always, and then it has helped in some situations where, if at first the producer and director is like, well, we need a name, we're like, well, right, but we're running out of those. They're busy in New York, and if they have to be in New York, then we've got to open it up to other people. And we've read roles, and that typically would probably be more offer only level. And then we get there and we'll read people, see if you just can find a great actor. And it's like, what a concept, finding a great actor in New York City. I don't know if I can do it. It's like, it's just how they think. And so, but that, yes, we've been able to open up in a really nice way, and I think give people really great opportunities. And I will say, nothing has felt better in all of this when I got to start calling again and booking people, and have managers and agents and actors, when we book directly, say, I haven't had a booking in several months, or I haven't worked in a year, or I haven't talked to anyone in 2 months at all.
Mhm.
And you're my first phone call. Like that was, that
Yeah.
was amazing.
Yeah. And I always like to remind actors, yes, each production is going to have its own requirements about whether they need a name for funding or what have you. But as casting directors, we are always looking for great actors. It doesn't matter the level. Because if we were just going to call, the same 5 agents that anyone would call, or the same celebrities anyone would call, why would anyone ask one of the 3 of us to work on their project? Besides that, we're all lovely and wonderful. But we are always trying to find the next exciting person, because that's why we're all in the business.
Great.
Yeah, and I think that's a great pleasure of working in the theater, where I work in regional theater, where we have the opportunity to, for me, work on a title that I probably wouldn't get to cast if it were a Broadway show, but I get to do an Ethel Fugard play last year that I had never, if that wouldn't come my way probably in New York, but I was able to do it at a regional theater. And I had never met any of the 4 actors who were in the company before I started working on that project. So like those kinds of opportunities are really cool for me, because it just expands, my awareness of different artists. And so we are also like, there's no such thing sort of as a wasted audition or a wasted, self-tape, because I'm sure Rachel and Suzanne are the same way. We're always sort of casting everything. So, when the theater is operating, I may be in an audition for one project, but of course I'm thinking about everything else too. Don't tell the producers that. But, and so, and amongst my colleagues, we're constantly like swapping and saying, oh, I saw this great person who would be great for Ain't Too Proud today, or whatever. And so, sadly, there's that whole part of the actors world that's the unpaid labor, right? The idea that like you're constantly preparing material and sharing material, but it really is sort of the purpose. We hang on to it. I'm not going to forget it if you sang an amazing song for me, even if we don't cast you this time around. You'll hear from us again, and it's pretty sure it's the same in every media. You'll see somebody once and then you see them again and again.
Great, thank you. Real quick, can one of you tell us the difference between self-taping versus a virtual audition? I know it's kind of already in the name, but just any kind of major differences you guys think might be interesting for us to know. Oh, and also, how does casting choose between those two methods?
Sure. So a self-tape is when we send out direction to the talent of the scene, what we're looking for, all of that. They record on their own time with a deadline in mind, of course, and then send it back to us. Once we get that, we make it feedback, ask for some adjustments, things like that. But it's more of a each on their own time situation. Virtual audition is live. So it would be us inviting people to some sort of platform, whether that's Zoom or Breakdown Express Live, or there are tons of platforms now that are trying to get into that. And having a conversation about the scene, recording the scene on this platform, giving live direction. In terms of deciding between the two, I think for all of us that may be different. I think time is a big part of it, whether we can devote a day to being glued to our Zoom or whether we are watching tapes amongst the rest of our workload. I think it can also depend on the scene, the needs of the project, how specific they are. So I think there are a lot of factors that go into that.
Great, thank you. So now with like virtual auditioning, actors have had to become creative in utilizing their living space as a studio for auditions, which can be a little tricky sometimes. What are the necessary items an actor may need for a virtual audition? And what type of background is ideal?
Yours looks beautiful, I'll say.
Oh, thank you.
Well, we try to keep it really simple and easy on the actors. If we can see you and hear you, that's pretty much it. Like simple backgrounds are good. Like yours is beautiful because it's not too cluttered. There's not too many little artifacts that just might draw the eye away or just make the frame a bit busy. Natural lighting, if you don't have professional lighting, tends to be better than a lot of ambient light. But there's a lot of I've always encouraged actors to, if you're going to invest in anything self-tape related, invest in yourself and invest in stuff that you get to keep. So like if you're going to get a light that goes onto your iPhone, or you want to get a better microphone, like something that then you can use again and again and again, versus going into some of, back before COVID, when you'd go into some of the places and spend, a lot of money and it was a one-off. So it's better to invest in the long term and get stuff in your home. And now everyone's done that because we've been forced to do that. Or even if you haven't, it's just, watching your space and what time of day the good light is, and knowing, okay, really the best light in my bedroom is this time of day, in my living room it's this time of day. So I really need to aim to be taping my tapes here. And then we also know there's a quick turnaround sometimes, and you might have to record at 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock at night. And that's just how it goes. And it's going to, again, as long as we can see you and hear you, it's a job well done. I mean, there's a few I've had to send back and be like, we really got to work on this, but we were working on something filming in Buffalo, New York. And it was a lot of like local theater actors who had literally never done a self-tape, not one. And so it was their first time out the gate. But with, generally, and especially with, actors younger than all of us, they come with these beautiful tapes. I'm like, how did you do this? And they're like, just in my bedroom with my iPad. I'm like, okay, that's fantastic.
Speaking of that kind of technology, we've already touched on sound and lighting. Um, Technology can be the source of frustration for many, including myself. There are there are various editing suites to, put your audition tape together. Sometimes casting directors ask for things in certain formats. Um, uh, what other things that can happen what are some of the things that can happen when tech goes against you? How can we avoid some of these common tech issues?
I'd say the biggest thing that's always my number one precaution is try to hardwire in your internet. I'm not doing that right now, so do as I say and not as I do, but it will just give you a little bit of peace of mind, because the number one thing that goes wrong is a bad connection. And that's something that no one can really do much about. You just hope it evens out. But at least if you're hardwired in, it's taking out a little bit of those odds. And then also another, do as I say, not as I do. Backlighting is always really bad. Don't have the window behind you, have it in front of you if possible. But yeah, those are kind of my two go-tos in terms of tips.
I think in terms of editing, again, it's keep it simple. I think sometimes when people overcomplicate it, it's when it becomes tough on our end, like they're sending too big of files. And some of those more advanced file sharing systems will let you send like over a gigabyte for one tape, and it just should never be a gigabyte. Like think about downloading that and processing that on our end. Most of like the professional casting sites max out at 500 megabytes per take, which is still large. So unless the scene's like 8 minutes or something, but if you're doing like a 1 to 2 to 3 minute scene, it doesn't need to be that big. And then just, knowing how to set the compression setting so it doesn't deteriorate the quality, but also we're not getting these huge files that then like really slow down the process on our end, or we can't then upload them. Like we've got to compress them before we can upload them, and then taking into account the number of tapes we're processing in a day. So like those are where it can sometimes, like QuickTime is a great one. iMovie is a great one. Like you don't have to get into the really advanced things, but then I'll get people that forget to convert like their Final Cut, and I'm like, oh, you don't need to process this through Final Cut. QuickTime will do the trick.
Yeah, I think the main thing is that I've tried to talk to, actors about during this time is just, we really want you to keep it simple, and we don't want you to spend a lot of money on equipment, and it isn't necessary, because what we're not looking at the of course we want the best quality possible, but we're not looking at the technical aspects. We're here for your audition, and so doing the best you can with what you can assemble in your home is most of the time more than adequate, because we're really focused on you and not your environment or your tech kit.
Tech savvy. Yeah, that's actually really comforting to hear, because sometimes a lot of us we're like, why isn't this light working right? Or you can see me, but it's like, oh, I've seen other actors have these such polished videos. So it can be a little intimidating. There are some other things we can do to control things that are in our control during the audition process. Like for example, eyeline. Eyeline is always a very tricky thing to do, especially when you have multiple points, multiple characters. How should actors approach the eyeline? If one person wants to chime in on that. And if
Sure.
not,
So I think it depends on the project. I think most importantly, if it was important, the casting director should tell you in the self-tape instructions. Or if you're in a virtual audition, that's a totally valid question to ask. So if it was important, it should be specified. If it was not specified, I think either do whatever's easiest and doesn't take away from your performance the most, or ask. I think that's another thing that is great about this virtual casting world is we can easily respond to an email, or a lot of these systems have some sort of messaging, way to message us. If it's something you're really struggling with, we are reachable. So obviously take that with a grain of salt and don't do that for every little question, or because we don't have the bandwidth. But I'd say whatever's easiest for eyeline, as long as we can see your eyes. So whether it's into camera, a little bit off, just, don't be over here.
Okay, so this is like a 3-part question. What are your guys' thoughts on props in the audition? How important is wardrobe? And also, what are the expectations for preparation and memorization?
Well, I would say that as far as costumes go, or wardrobe, we don't really need to see you dressed, in your approximation of the character's costume. Obviously, there are things that an actor will probably do to there's a great casting director in New York named Daniel Swee, who I heard one time say dress toward the character, which I've stolen ever since. And I think that's really, really good. There might be something about the way that you're dressed that helps you be closer to that character, that grounds you in that character. So, if you're playing someone who wears a uniform, you might not want to wear, a lacy dress, because you want to have something that makes you think more about a uniform or a person who wears a uniform every day. As far as props go, they can be a little distracting, especially in a kind of self-tape. But sometimes I have seen people use a simple thing to help them with an audition. A piece of paper for a necktie one time, and somebody made that just work. That she took her sides and used them as handing a necktie to someone. And so if you need to do something with a prop that is going to make your audition great, then go right ahead and do it. It's the thing to avoid, I think, is for it to be all about the props, to let that obscure the story that you're telling and the work that you're doing. Was that all 3 parts?
I think so.
Okay.
Yeah. You got them all, Tara. Okay, so now we're going to talk about a big one. It's a question a lot of actors have been asking about the body shot, full body shot. That can be a little tricky to get, especially when you're trying to do it horizontally. Any tips on that? It can be a little vulnerable to have casting see various things in the background if it's such a wide screen. Like during Christmas time, I remember I had to move my Christmas tree every time. Luckily it's a fake one and it's lightweight, but I had to move it because I was like, I don't want it to look like Christmas in my audition or in my slate or whatever. So any tips on that?
We're strictly doing it because we can't meet you in person, right? So we're just trying to gather as much information as we can. And we certainly don't mean to make anyone feel awkward and you don't need to move your Christmas tree. It's okay. If we see some artifacts during that, we understand it's a very hard thing to do. And I think what I've seen a lot of actors do now is they kind of take a still shot and when it's convenient and comfortable and just keep reusing the same one. And they'll edit that in at the beginning of their slate. And then, it's typically people ask for the talking portion of your slate to be much closer so we can see you better. So they'll put that in as a still shot and then cut to their talking part of their slate. I find that to be very smart and very well done, because then it's we're not doing these slates each time and we're not thinking oh, they weren't wearing the same outfit, that's weird. It's we get that, okay, this is not an easy function to do, especially in a New York City apartment. There's not a lot of sometimes there's not even the space to get far enough away. But yeah, then it's, again, just slate is strictly informational gathering for us. It shouldn't be any more than that. And I think it causes a lot of stress with actors. We've learned, like through a couple other panels we've done through the CSA, is it's a very big point of stress for actors, and we don't mean for it to be. And you just totally take it as it's information we need because we can't see you in person. That's it. And then we're really, you know, obviously more concerned about the scene work and the character work that you're about to do.
Cool. Let's now talk a little bit about readers. What's the best option? Sometimes it's a little hard for people to ask friends or family to do it because everyone's busy, everyone's working from home, different schedules. So it can be a little bit of a challenge. Do you have any recommendations for that?
That's another one I think. Talk to different people and you're going to get different answers. I just want whatever's not going to take away from your performance. So I know a lot of people will do kind of you type it out and that robotic voice will read the things back. That I don't like, because then I think we're in some sort of sci-fi scene. I like, compared to that, I prefer just skipping the lines and, you know, hearing them in your head. If you can have a friend on speakerphone and it's not too tinny and loud and distracting, you can try that. But that's another thing where we get it. We know there are challenges, so whatever is going to help you have the best performance.
I think Zoom's been really effective in that. If you can get a buddy to record the audition with you over Zoom so that it's on you the whole time and you're in the recording mode and they turn their camera off so they don't pop in ever, then the audio tends to be really good and the timing's better than if you're trying to do like she said, I don't like either of those options either. And then you know, if it's someone live with you, if it's your roommate or whoever, you know, you've been quarantining with, and I know we're moving out of that, but it was great to kind of see like who was with them, and like it was clearly like you know, an aunt or a mom or a grandmother, and it's you know, as long as they're not really detracting from it or not keeping pace or something, or they're being they overact, they tend, which is always very amusing. Or you know, there isn't an imbalance of sound that like if you have an onboard mic that the auditioner is quieter than the reader, and then you have to crank it to hear this person, but then the reader's really loud. But again, we're very understanding of all of that. And I think maybe 1 in 1,000, I go back and say, I need you to redo it because this was really distracting and I really liked your performance, but I'm worried if I pass it along, it'll be too distracting. In general, we're like, get over it. It's, you know, the performance is great. We don't care.
Some of the kids and grandparents were my favorite.
Yeah, like I know, I live with one roommate, but one of my problems with sound has been airplanes. I don't know why every time I'm doing an audition, airplanes love to just fly right over my apartment. I don't know why. We're going to be getting into our question and answer section pretty soon, but I wanted to ask a couple of questions, more questions about self-tapes. I think we touched on this before. Are self-tapes only for pre-reads? What is a benefit from doing a self-tape? And what do you think is the biggest thing missing from self-tapes when you watch them back? I know it's a lot of questions. If you can remember them, hit me up.
So are they always for pre-reads? I'd say for the most part, yes. And if we can do a callback virtually, that's always preferable, but not every project will need that or want that. So I'd say it's usually pre-reads, but every project is going to have different needs. What were the two others? Oh, you're muted.
Yeah, thank you. I believe it was, what is a benefit from doing self-tapes, which I think we kind of touched on too.
Yeah, I think just you're able to do it on your own time.
Right. And what is the biggest thing that you've been missing from self-tapes in the ones that you've seen so far?
I mean, just being in the room, at least for me, being able to work with actors. We all love actors. We love digging into a scene and getting to talk through it. And you can do that to some extent on Zoom, but there's nothing like the energy in a room.
Agreed. Also, to another good question is, how many takes should you send in for one scene? How many is too many? How little is too little?
I think 2 or 3 is always nice, because especially right now, as we don't have the option to be in the room, it's nice to see a couple of options. But then, they shouldn't be drastically different, right? Because you're playing the same character the whole time. But if there's just little nuances and things you wanted to try, and you can call those out to us. So if like you see, like in this one, I was, this was kind of my focus. The second one, it was this. I think be careful in the labeling. I've gotten takes will say like take 37, and I'm like, but they send me 3, but then they're like take 37. I'm like, okay, that's overkill. And part of it is once it's the same preparation and audition as if you were going into the room. So you prepare and then you're ready to tape or you're ready to audition. So don't drive yourself nuts with doing take after take. Like, kind of be a kind self-critic, but also self-edit yourself and say, okay, if I do it 5 times, like that's more than you would probably do in the room, most likely. Like normally I'd say the average audition, we do it 2 or 3 times. And if you do it the first time and it's golden, there's no reason to do it again. And that some, really smart actors, you'll see that they'll do it once and they'll look at me like, okay, I'm done. Can I go to lunch now? Cause like they know they've hit it and they're that aware of themselves. Not everyone, obviously that takes a while to learn and to build. So I'm always happy to look at 2 or 3 because I'm like, well, maybe there's something a bit different and there's something that it's speaking more to what the director wants that I didn't necessarily articulate well enough. And then, but oh, there it is in take 3, it wasn't there in take 1. So I'm always happy to look at a few. I might not show all 3, but I'm happy to look at more than one.
Yeah, I think it sort of reveals a little bit about the actor, especially if it's something that an actor I don't know that well. So if someone sends me, a second take and I think, oh, I see, she wasn't sure how vulnerable this character is in this moment, so she did it a second time, with that in mind, I think, well, there's there's somebody with like really great ideas about this scene, and someone that we'd be excited to try to work with. So it's sort of like the text will kind of lead you through, I think, how many times, how many different ideas you want to bring to it.
Great. Okay, so now I'm going to look at our questions that we have in the box here. If one of you guys could chime in on this, do you prefer slate at the beginning or the end of the self tape?
Either one. I don't have a big preference. I think it's, yeah, as long as it's there and you don't forget to do it, or you don't do it when you're not asked. I've like ran into a casting director the other day who hates slates, and I never in my life heard of that. I was like, I thought everyone likes slates. No, I hate them. Don't do it. I was like, well, but do you tell the actors that, or do you just let them slate? She's like, no, I tell them. I was like, okay, but no, beginning to end is fine.
And follow the instructions. So if they say no slate, don't do slate, because a lot of times I need it at the front and so many people put it at the back. So then I'm then editing. So follow instructions.
I can't say you guys have been coming strong with the instructions. I've noticed from my auditions, very specific. I read them like 3 or 4 times to make sure I don't miss anything because everyone is different, I've noticed. Let's see here. Are COVID / assumption of risk or liability waivers standard now for union, non-union, and print? We're often asked to sign prior to auditioning. What are actors expected to sign now that productions have resumed?
I haven't had to have anyone sign anything prior to auditioning. I mean, certainly once you're hired, there's like, in your contract, there's always built-in liability and risk, right? But I'm sure there's been clauses added, but the productions are, going to great lengths, like unbelievable lengths to really protect that. But I haven't heard of before you audition. Have you?
I mean, we do work for one big company who they ask actors, like in normal circumstances, to sign a release so before they walk in the room. So I guess if like you trip over a chair, you can't sue them. But I guess there might be companies that do that. The only, the restrictions seem to come from the productions and from the unions so far. The most meaningful protocols and response to the pandemic.
Okay, let me see here. I think we also might have answered this, but I think maybe repeating it might be helpful for a lot of people. What's an appropriate file size for a self-tape audition?
I would say never over 500 just be megabytes, because that's our limit on the various platforms. I don't know why, that's universal. I really like, and I'm not paid by anyone to say this, I really like Vimeo just because then I can pick the download size. It gives us options, which is really nice. So we don't then have to do the second step of compressing. But if it's like a minute to 2 to 3 minute file, it should be under 300, I would say. Is that fair, Rachel?
And just if you are using Vimeo, make sure that you allow download access.
Yes.
Okay. How do you guys feel like virtual auditioning what kind of effect do you think it's going to have on casting in the future? Layered question and concept, huh?
My fear is that we're going to be asked to continue it beyond when we could go back, and I think there is some stuff we can do remotely, and we've proven we do it quite well remotely. But I think we're going to have to band together as a profession, both casting directors and actors, and really advocate to get those in-person meetings back when it's considered safe. I mean, for like Tara, for like dance calls and open calls and having like 200 dancers in a room at a time, that I don't know. That I think that's much trickier than like in film and TV. It's usually like one-on-one, so it's the risk is less. But that would just be my fear, that we don't get to, they're like, oh, well, you did it so beautifully, just keep doing that because it's cheaper for us if you do that. So I think we're going to have to come together in a real way to say, no, this is part of our art, this is part of our process. We need to be back in person when it's safe to do so.
And also the studio spaces, I think we're all we don't know what's going to happen next, because in LA, especially New York, a lot of the casting studios haven't been able to survive the pandemic. So when we do go back, I think there's a lot of questions of what that will look like with theater open calls and how that's going to happen. So asking us how this will change casting in general is a little bit like a crystal ball thing. I don't think we know, but we're hoping we'll be back in the room.
Yeah, I think we can only hope that we keep the best parts of it, which is that when we use it, when it is helpful to both sides, when an actor can't be in the city where auditions are being held, so if it increases our ability to get to know you, I hope we can continue to use self-tapes, and probably like in the way that we would have used screening auditions, or and I think that it will be a while before we can have 30 dancers in a room again. I don't know when we'll be able to do that again. So, or 100 waiting in the hallways and in a separate room. So that's something that still needs to be solved, I think.
Given the lack of in-person auditioning, Should the slate be used to really show off your personality?
I think I wouldn't overthink it. I think the slate is the one part where the actor has to be truly vulnerable because they're not playing their character, they're just themselves. So I don't think any of us realized how stressful that was, and we do now. So I'd say just be happy to be there. That's the energy we're looking for in the slate. I'm stealing this from another casting director, but they said that an actor's job is to make it sound like everything they're saying they haven't said a million times before, and bring that to your slate. You've said your name a million times, but for the slate, just say it like it's something new. And I loved that.
I like that too. That's pretty cool. Traditionally, if a production holds in-person auditions and one opts for self-tapes, for whatever reason, scheduling, convenience, etc., would that set you back in the decision process against those that auditioned in person?
I don't think so. I mean, I've heard actors say to me, "Oh, I submit a self tape and nobody watches it." I'm like, I literally even watch the ones I don't ask for, and even but I don't tell the people. If you get kind of someone sneaks one in there and it hasn't been requested, I still watch it. I just don't tell anyone that unless it's great, then of course I tell everyone. But no, I don't think that it does. And I think, again, now it's a whole new world, right? So it's like how we view that is going to be completely different. Where like I've worked on TV shows where like, no, you must meet the actor in person, and they were very concerned about just making sure, if an actor is working with a very high profile actor, that they'll know how to behave, and that's also a big part of our job is just getting to know the actor as a person and making sure they're just responsible and they're going to go to the set and represent us the best, represent the production the best. And that's something you certainly can't really get over self-tape and email, which sometimes you can, but sometimes you can't. So we've had producers be very concerned of like, well, you need to meet everyone because they're going to be working next to X actor and they have to, that's the only time I've really had to be so strict that you have to meet them or someone on production has to meet them ahead of time. But otherwise, self-tapes have always been a very accepted, cherished part of our process.
Great. Okay, well, just to wrap up, we have one last question. If each one of you could give us a little tidbit on what kind of advice you would have for people looking to start working in casting right now. Yes, that is the question.
Well, I would say if you want to work in casting, start developing your kind of mental database about actors. Every time you watch something that you like, make note of a performance that you thought was really great. Chances are when you go into an interview in a casting office, someone will ask you a question like that. What was the last great thing you really enjoyed? Or is there a performance that really moved you? So begin to think about the kind of actors that you like, begin to make note of them, and start to get in touch with people. Let people know that you're looking for a job. Like acting, you don't always audition for the job that you're going to get down the line, and or you don't always audition first for that job. And we keep resumes on file sometimes for I'll pull out a resume and say like, what about this person for an assistant? And someone will say, oh God, Tara, she got a job at Warner Brothers like 5 years ago. Like, oh right, sorry, I forgot about that. So, but start trying and watch panels. If you see someone that you think is really interesting, write them a letter and tell them.
Cool. All right. Well, thank you all for the great questions, and a special thank you so much to Tara, Susanne, and Rachel for sharing so much wisdom with us. We'd like to thank everyone who tuned in for joining us today, and a special thanks to our many donors for supporting BU and programs like this. For more information about the many fantastic online events coming soon, please visit bu.edu/alumni/events. You can also find many fantastic career resources on the BU Alumni website by visiting bu.edu/alumni/careers. Lastly, you can continue the conversation on BU's new online networking and mentoring community, BU Connects, where you can find fellow alumni in your industry or those who have similar interests and connect online. To sign up, visit www.buconnects.com. And thank you all again so much for joining us, and have a wonderful night. And I'm so glad we're getting through this together. And the light, I see the light at the end of the tunnel. We're getting there.
Thank you, Chevonne. That was wonderful. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thanks.
Bye.